The room is cold, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, their sterile glow casting sharp shadows against sleek glass walls, the hum of servers pulsing through the air like a heartbeat, matching the pace of Silicon Valley's unyielding quest for innovation. It's the early 2000s, and the tech world is a fever dream of ambition and money. Young prodigies and seasoned investors alike are cashing in and chasing the next breakthrough, the next billionaire, the next legend. And at the center of it all stands a woman who seemed to emerge from nowhere, her eyes alight with a vision so bold it was impossible to ignore. Her blonde hair pulled back with precision, her voice lowered to carefully craft baritone command. She speaks of revolution, a world where blood tests are as simple as a prick of the finger, where technology and healthcare collide to create something that will save millions of lives. The dream is intoxicating. Investors fall at her feet. Journalists herald her as the next Steve Jobs, and the world watches as her empire, Theranos, rises from nothing to 9 billion. But every empire casts a shadow. Behind the turtlenecks, the practiced charisma, something is simmering. Discontent, fear, the unmistakable stench of a promise too good to be true. The world only saw the brilliance, the innovation, the sleek promotional videos, promising a new era of medicine. What it didn't see, what it refused to see, was the deception that lay at the heart of it all. Welcome to GBRLIFE Transmissions. I'm your host, Caitlin, and this is GBRLIFE of Crimes, where we don't just explore what happened, but why. And today we unravel the story of a woman whose ambition drove her to dazzling heights and whose deception brought her crashing down. This is the tale of a dream turned nightmare, of a visionary who believed her own myth, and of a system that punished her not just for her lies, but for the audacity to play the game like a man. Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes wasn't born into the world of Silicon Valley. She carved her own path within it. But every architect has a blueprint, and Holmes began in Washington, D.C. in 1984. Born to a family connected to medicine and public service, Elizabeth grew up in an environment steeped in ambition. Her father, Christian Holmes, held significant roles in government agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, while her mother, Noel, worked as a congressional aide. They weren't billionaires. They were well-connected, part of a social network that valued intellect and achievement. Elizabeth's childhood was marked by high expectations and a relentless pursuit of excellence. She was known to read lengthy textbooks even as a child, driven by a hunger to understand and master the world around her. Those who knew her during her youth described her as serious, focused, and unwilling to accept anything less than perfection from herself. By the time she reached high school, Elizabeth's ambition had taken root. She excelled academically, but her true passion laid in healthcare, specifically in making healthcare accessible to all. Her fear of needles was well documented, even then, a phobia she described as intense and personal. To Elizabeth, the idea that blood testing, something so essential to diagnose illness, could be streamlined and simplified became an obsession. As a teenager, Elizabeth spent her summers in rigorous study programs. At Stanford University's summer programs for gifted youth, she developed a love for Mandarin Chinese, a skill she would use to later bolster her reputation as a multi-talented prodigy. Her ability to immerse herself in complex subjects and master them quickly became a defining trait. When Elizabeth entered Stanford University in 2002, her drive intensified. She enrolled in chemical engineering, captivated by the idea of merging technology with medicine to create something revolutionary. She was known for her intensity. Professors and peers alike noted her willingness to work longer hours than everyone else. Her determination led her to approach one of her professors, Channing Robertson, with an idea that would shape the rest of her life, a device capable of running comprehensive blood tests from a single drop of blood. The concept was ambitious, perhaps even lucrative to some, but Elizabeth was persuasive. Robertson, a respected figure in the world of chemical engineering, became her mentor, and later a board member of her fledgling company. Elizabeth dropped out in 2003, convinced that her vision couldn't wait. She founded Theranos, with a mission of making healthcare accessible and painless. The name itself was a combination of therapy and diagnosis, a nod to the company's ambitious goals. At just 19, she had already begun to project her own character, wearing black turtlenecks as homage to Steve Jobs, lowering her voice to project authority, and presenting herself as a genius with a plan to change the world. And Theranos grew quickly, attracting high-profile investors and board members, and her charisma and unwavering belief in her vision captivated those around her. Elizabeth spoke passionately about making healthcare different, creating a world where early diagnosis was available to everyone, regardless of their economic status. Her message resonated and money poured in, but beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. Elizabeth's obsession with perfection, the pressure to deliver on her promises, drove her to cultivate a culture of secrecy and fear within Theranos. Employees were compartmentalized, projects kept under tight control, and anyone who questioned the company's technology was quickly silenced. Elizabeth's ambition was not just about revolutionizing healthcare, it was about control. She demanded absolute loyalty from her employees, and those who failed to meet her standards were dismissed without hesitation. Critics were seen as enemies, and the pressure to maintain the image of success became an all-consuming force. Her ability to inspire was undeniable, but as her empire grew, so did the facade she was building. Investors were dazzled by her vision, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into Theranos despite the fact that the company's technology was still largely unproven. She saw herself as a visionary, someone destined to change the world. Her confidence was infectious, and her strategy was simple: project confidence and keep the illusion intact. The idea of failure was so intolerable to her that she doubled down, not on improving the technology, but on concealing its flaws. Theranos conducted demos that were nothing more than illusions. Samples were secretly processed using conventional machines to produce acceptable results. Employees began to feel the strain of working under Elizabeth's authoritarian leadership. Turnover rates were high, and those who stayed were often plagued by anxiety and exhaustion. The constant pressure to produce results, despite knowing the technology's limitations, created a toxic environment where truth became the enemy. But Elizabeth was not one to surrender easily. Even as articles began to expose Theranos, she continued to deny any wrongdoing. One came out from the Wall Street Journal, beginning to look into the claims made by Theranos. The walls were closing in, investors were beginning to demand answers. Regulators were launching investigations, and still Elizabeth clung to her narrative of success. The architect of ambition was now trapped within her own creation, and the illusion she built was beginning to crumble. The Wall Street Journal article was only the beginning. As the truth about Theranos' flawed technology spread, Elizabeth Holmes' carefully constructed empire began to collapse from within. Employees who had previously been silenced by threats of legal action or loyalty to Elizabeth now found their voices. Former lab directors, scientists, and engineers began to speak out about the corrosion and fear that permeated the company. Regulators took notice. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services launched an investigation, uncovering multiple violations of federal standards. Laboratories under Theranos' control were found to be grossly mismanaged, with unqualified employees performing tests that had the potential to endanger patients' lives. The violations were severe enough to prompt CMS to issue a sanction that barred Elizabeth from owning or operating a clinical laboratory for 2 years. Elizabeth's response was predictable: defiance. She appeared in interviews doubling down on her claims of innovation and revolution. She accused detractors of misunderstanding her vision, framing herself as a pioneer under siege by those unwilling to accept change. Walgreens, one of Theranos' biggest partners, terminated their relationship with the company and filed a $140 million lawsuit. Lawsuits from investors and patients soon followed, a devastating blow to the reputation Elizabeth had fought so hard to preserve. And the final blow came in 2018, when the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission charged Elizabeth Holmes with massive fraud. The complaint alleged that she had engaged in an elaborate years-long scheme to deceive investors about the capabilities of Theranos' technology. Rather than denying the allegations outright, Elizabeth chose to settle with the SEC, agreeing to relinquish control of the company and pay a $500,000 fine. But her legal troubles were far from over. The Department of Justice launched its own investigation, resulting in Elizabeth's indictment on charges of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She faced up to 20 years in prison. Despite the mounting evidence against her, Elizabeth maintained her innocence. In interviews, she continued to speak about her vision for revolutionizing healthcare. Her voice steady and unwavering, but the confidence that once inspired investors now seemed like desperation. In court, prosecutors painted her as a manipulative, calculated individual who exploited. They argued that Elizabeth had prioritized her own ambition over the safety of patients, intentionally misleading those who trusted her. The trial dragged for months, with testimony from former employees, patients, and investors painting the same picture. Elizabeth herself took the stand, her demeanor calm and collected. She insisted that she had always acted with the best of intentions, that her goal had always been to improve the world. But the jury saw through her narrative, and in 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on multiple counts of fraud. The woman who had once been hailed as the next Steve Jobs now stood as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how ambition, left unchecked, could spiral into disaster. Theranos was dissolved, and even as the company failed, Elizabeth maintained her composure. Her story was over, but her obsession with control remained. To her, the dream had never been about deception. It had always been about making her vision a reality, no matter the cost. But what drove Elizabeth Holmes to this point? To understand her rise and fall, we must go into her psychological landscape. Growing up, she valued prestige and success. This was internalized, and she demonstrated signs of what psychologists refer to as a fixed mindset. The belief that intelligence and talent were innate qualities that must be demonstrated rather than developed. For Elizabeth, failure was not a learning opportunity. It was a threat to her very identity, and her obsession with perfection can be linked to this fixed mindset. And studies have shown that individuals with this perspective often develop a fear so profound that they will go to great lengths to avoid situations that might expose their flaws. But another key element of her psychology was her apparent lack of empathy. Psychologists often discuss a phenomenon known as the dark triad, a combination of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Elizabeth's behavior does show signs of narcissism and Machiavellianism. Her narcissism manifested in her grandiose vision for Theranos, a vision that placed her at the center of healthcare revolution. She framed herself as a savior, a disruptor, someone who would single-handedly change the world. The sheer scale of her ambition speaks to a level of self-importance that borders on delusion. Machiavellianism, meanwhile, can be seen in her willingness to manipulate those around her. Her environment was of fear and secrecy within Theranos, punishing those who dared to question her authority. Her ability to charm investors while hiding the truth about her technology demonstrates a level of cunning that many would consider ruthless. But perhaps the most fascinating psychological aspect is her relationship with cognitive dissonance. This is the discomfort experienced when one's actions conflict with their beliefs or self-image. For Elizabeth, the belief that she was a genius innovator clashed with the reality of her technology, which was failing. Rather than confronting this contradiction, she chose to double down on her claims, rationalizing her deception as she took the necessary steps to what she thought would be eventual success. In her mind, the ends justified the means. To admit failure was to destroy not just her company, but her identity. And so Elizabeth continued the charade, convinced that she would eventually make her technology work. The lies became a temporary bridge between her reality and her ambition. She believed that she could one day replace with actual achievement. And her downfall was not simply the result of technological failure or financial mismanagement. It was inevitable because of the psychological structure built on denial, arrogance, and a desperate need to maintain control. But there's another side to this story. One that asks why Elizabeth Holmes was pursued so aggressively while her male counterparts have often been allowed to slip through the cracks. Consider the tech landscape. It was a world built by men, for men, with male founders at the helm of the most powerful companies, and many of them have engaged in deception, manipulation, and outright fraud. Adam Neumann, the co-founder of WeWork, promised a revolutionary approach to shared workspaces. But under his leadership, the company bled billions of dollars, its valuation cratering from $47 billion to a fraction of that amount. Neumann was forced out, but not charged with fraud. Travis Kalanick, co-founder of Uber, built a company that flouted laws, engaged in unethical surveillance practices, and cultivated a toxic work culture. Yet, when he was forced to step down as CEO, it was framed as a necessary but unfortunate consequence of his aggressive business style, never an outright fraud or manipulation. Then there's another very well-known billionaire who made repeated misleading statements about his car company's technology and financial health. His infamous tweet about taking his car company private at $420 a share with funding secured led to a slap on the wrist, a settlement with the SEC that allowed him to remain CEO. And he's far more than that today. So what's the difference? Elizabeth Holmes was a woman operating in a man's world, a world where the archetype of ambitious, cutthroat entrepreneur is a man's role to play. And when a woman dares to challenge that narrative, the backlash can be ferocious. Elizabeth Holmes was prosecuted not only for her fraud, but for her audacity, the audacity to position herself as a revolutionary leader, the audacity to adapt the aesthetics of Silicon Valley visionary, the audacity to lie. Yes, but to lie in a way that mimicked the behavior of so many male founders who were never held accountable. The pursuit of Elizabeth Holmes was in many ways justified. She did lie. She did mislead investors, and she did put patients' lives at risk. But the fury of her takedown, the relentless media coverage, the spectacle of her trial, it all points to something more. When a woman fails, especially when she dared to adopt the mannerisms of powerful men, society is quick to punish her. Elizabeth Holmes was the perfect villain for a world that still struggles to accept ambitious women. This isn't to say Elizabeth Holmes was innocent. Far from it. But her story is also a cautionary tale about gender and power, about how women's fall from grace is treated with more vindictiveness than that of her male counterparts. In the end, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted, not only by the legal system, but by a culture that views women who dare to play the same ruthless game as men as inherently more sinister. Had she been a man, would her punishment been as severe? Would her deception have been framed as visionary persistence instead of cold-hearted manipulation? The truth is, we'll never know. This has been GBRLIFE of Crimes, part of GBRLIFE Transmissions. Now I'm Caitlin, reminding you that understanding the darkness helps us appreciate the light. Join me next time as we uncover another case that challenges everything we thought we knew about the criminal mind.